Thanks for tuning in. I'm Joel Amadon.
And I'm Ann Monroe.
And this is The Road to Better Teaching, a podcast series where we discuss stories of teacher development. We are here recording.
We are here, yeah.
With Dr. Joseph Patrick Sweeney.
This is the day we've been waiting for.
We have been, yes, everyone has been waiting for.
Everyone.
Will we get through this podcast? That's
I don't
the
know.
question.
That's the question.
Hi, Joe. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. How about you?
Really?
Yeah, I'm doing all right.
Okay.
Well, that's more like it.
There you go.
Let's try that. How are you, Joe? I'm all right.
All right. Obviously, as you can tell, we're friends with Joe Sweeney, and we're excited that he gets a chance to come on and talk about a moment of his teaching. How long have you known? You've known Joe a lot longer than I have.
I have. I've known Joe for almost 18 years. How old is Connor?
Well, Connor is 19 now.
So 18.
Yes.
A little over 18 years,
Yep.
probably. Yep.
Wow.
Actually, well, I knew you before Connor was born.
Oh, that's right. Okay, so
We met
19
in
years.
2004.
Okay, there you go.
2004. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I graduated from college in 2003.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
also
There we go.
disturbing.
Best 5.5 years of my life. It's great. Joe, could you give us a little introduction? Obviously, you know Dr. Monroe. We know each other very well, but the audience doesn't. Could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Joe Sweeney. I am the director of the Mississippi Teacher Corps, and I'm a clinical associate professor here at the University of Mississippi, and I also coordinate the online MAT program.
Okay, fantastic. So and I would say you wear a few more hats around the School of Education. Another one, I think a big hat that you wear, maybe a chef's hat.
I was going to say a particular type of hat.
That you are one of the co-founder.
I say co-sponsor.
Co-sponsor.
I didn't found it. We for the cookie swap.
I found the
It's
cookie
for
swap, yes.
it's the-
But I brought Joe into the fold when he came back, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm I guess the co-host of the cookie swap
Yeah,
in the School of Education.
A little bit more than that, I'd say, though.
Yeah.
I'd say he's a little bit more than a co-host.
Yeah, the creative inspiration.
Creative inspiration, grand poobah of baking.
No one has ever said that.
Okay, well, there you go. I just did.
The only reason I say it because it could be like the smallest thing that I'm doing, like dropping something off for you, and all of a sudden I get a plate full of cookies.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's really nice, Joe.
Oh.
Right, nice. I appreciate it. So,
well, you're welcome.
love how you share your love through baking. It's good.
Yes, it's a fun event, and I'll tie that into what I'm going to talk about here in just a second.
Fantastic.
Oh, wow.
All right,
Baking
here we go.
tie-in? This is fantastic.
So let's get in. Would you say it's a catalyst for what we're trying to do here?
It's absolutely a catalyst for this further discussion.
For talking about
Yes,
teaching.
Absolutely.
Great.
Wow, okay.
100 points. All right, here we go. Joe, could you start with our interview countdown, and where we do 3, 2, 1, where you're going to start by thanking 3 teachers who have shaped your development as a person.
Absolutely. So first, I grew up in northern Michigan in Traverse City, and I went to Old Mission Peninsula School. And so one of my first teachers for kindergarten was Mrs. Nowak. And so she, some teachers at a school, they're like an institution there. Like they have been there forever. Everyone knows them. They just basically are what the school is. And so I had her for actually 2 years. I had her for kindergarten and first grade. And she wasn't the most, I guess, gregarious or high energy. She just had a very calm presence to her. She did a great job managing the classroom. She was very passionate about what she was doing. And of course, in kindergarten, first grade, you're learning how to read and everything. So we had, I don't know if you remember those classic books, the Mr. Happy books. We had
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
I love those.
Yeah.
So I remember
Like the dots, the colored
little
dots.
dot,
Is that what
yes.
you're talking about?
Yes,
Yeah.
they
Uh-huh.
had, yep. And each one had a little shape and then a different theme to it. Then we also had this theme of every letter would be kind of introduced once a week, and it had, every letter had its own personality. And
Was it Alphabet People?
I think it was.
Was there a
Alphabet
TV
People.
show that went with it?
Possibly.
Because
I, don't know.
I used to
didn't-
watch that in kindergarten, but
I just
yeah.
remember the G stood for gum, and it had fallen asleep, and the gum had coated the G. I just remember that being like the tragic downfall of the letter G was he'd fallen asleep. And then it was kind of interesting too because all the vowels were gendered too, which a conversation for another day. But all the vowels were female.
Yeah.
I need to look that up
Interesting.
because it was very interesting. Like why are the vowels? I don't know.
Yeah. What are the
What's the
choices there?
significance of this?
Yeah.
But I just I remember little things like that, and I just remember she emphasized reading and literacy, and was just again very calm no matter what was happening. She was very very much calm and in control of the classroom. And the next teacher would be Mrs. Olson. I had in 5th and 6th grade. What I liked about her, she allowed us to kind of explore on our own quite a bit. So this was the early...
Like the streets of Traverse City? Is that what you're talking about?
She just let us outside. She's just like,
Canoe on the bay, no problem.
Explore in terms of learning. So she did a lot of project-based things where we could, I remember studying estate, and we wrote at that time. There's no internet, so you're writing letters to the Bureau of Tourism from California, and they would send you a bunch of brochures, and you would kind of put together some sort of a project about the state of California. I remember doing that. So it was kind of things like that. And then also, if we had free time, we had the first computer I was ever exposed to, the Apple IIgs, had one of those in the classroom. And if you finished your work early, you could go and play Number Munchers and Oregon Trail.
Lemonade stand.
Yes, you could. And that was just something that I really connected with. And a lot of my friends also connected with that as well. Just because it was fun. Like the computer was such a novel thing at that point. Didn't have one at home. You didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have the screens that you had that you have now. You have TV at home, but this was interactive. So I just remember being very just excited about that, being able to play those games and do those things in that classroom.
Yeah. Number Munchers. The anxiety of like that purple thing coming after you. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then having to remember the times tables at the same time. It's
Stress.
Stress. I mean, it enhanced my relationship with math, but it might have caused a
It
little
could
bit
have
of damage
caused
for
some damage for others.
Yeah.
We've talked about that before. Yeah, not always a good thing.
but yeah, and then with problem solving with Oregon Trail, like there's
Dysentery.
the what now?
There was dysentery.
Dysentery. You would die. Yeah. If you didn't.
I mean, how many kids know what that is now? Like, it's bad. It's bad for Susie. Like, whatever.
It's really bad.
Yeah. Like,
Well, the other interesting thing is if you play after someone and you see their tombstone along the way, it would say like you could look at their tombstone and it would say that Sally died of dysentery.
Oh,
It's hilarious.
clarity ensues.
And then I still got one more, right?
Yep,
Okay,
3.
So
So,
the
1, 2,
third
3.
teacher, I would say, is kind of a. Well, let me say Mr. Townsend from he was not my main teacher in 5th and 6th grade, but he taught the math part of we rotated a couple classes. And that was the first instance where I realized that a man could be a teacher. As you're a kid, like you have realizations that sometimes seem kind of silly, but as a kid you don't realize someone like me can become a teacher. And there's such a big significance to having representation of teachers that are similar to their students. So that was, again, he was also he loved his job. Like you can tell when someone absolutely enjoys what they're doing when they're teaching. And he's one of those people.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I just remember, like, I had in 6th grade 3 male teachers as well.
I had my first male teacher in 6th grade, Mr. Galick. It was like a switch class. I was in his homeroom, but then we had Mrs. Miller as well. But it was a switch class, and he was fantastic, and he loved what he was doing too. Yeah.
We had Mr. West, and he had a fantastic mustache, and but he would have the buzzers that we could play like Quiz Bowl in. Like he kept them in his class, so like he would roll them out every now and then we would just dust every other class because they weren't used to it, and like we would accent on the stuff. We were so good. Oh my gosh, it was so much fun.
Well, I remember Mr. Townsend. He had one of those Mazda. I think it's the RX 6 or something, or MX-5 or something. Those little, they're kind of like a sporty Mazda.
Yeah.
Like probably the best thing, it's the sportiest thing a teacher could drive. And everyone was like, he's the coolest teacher. He had
just peeling
he had
out
that red Mazda.
410. That's right. So I mean, you kind of that was maybe a little reason right there, but maybe you got something else. 2 reasons or events that led you to be a teacher.
Sure, I have just one actually.
You named one already.
Well, okay. So I have one more, but so for me, I don't necessarily have those like lightning strike moments where it's like the light bulb goes off and that's the decision that I've made. Sometimes it comes a little more slowly. So when I started college, I was going to be a professional golf. I was in professional golf management, so I was going to be a golf professional, teaching lessons and managing golf courses and things like that. And after 2 years of that, I realized that it was not for me for various number of reasons. And so I took what is now called a gap year. Back then, they just called it dropping out. But in hindsight,
you're ahead of the curve, Joe.
Yeah,
Trendsetter. Yeah.
So I took the gap year before it became trendy, and of course, people were concerned. But what I needed to do was take a moment to figure out what I was going to do. And so I worked at a golf course, saved up a bunch of money during the summer. Of course, it's Michigan, so the golf course is closed in the winter. But I had an apartment and had enough money to get me through the year. But I also got a job at a record store. And that's also when I was in a band. So for those that didn't get the Catalyst reference earlier on, I was in a band named Catalyst. And so I had things that I was doing.
Wait, what kind of genre was Catalyst, by the way?
We'll categorize it as rock, heavy rock.
Loose.
Rock with very like the roughest edged rock, like not a smooth pebble. Like we're talking a
ragged
rock.
Ragged
rock.
Yes, and moving on.
Ragged
or ragged rock.
Ragged.
One day I may play it for you. It's actually like we. I don't want to get too off topic, but we had to define myself. We had a fairly strong local following. We sold several hundred CDs. We recorded 2 CDs. We'd produce our own. Not produce. When you do a show, what's it called? When you
we would produce your own show. Sure.
Right. We'd rent places out.
Yeah.
And we'd have hundreds of people.
Nice.
So it was actually like a legitimate.
They sold a couple of dozen CDs. It was amazing.
No, we sold several hundred.
He said several hundred. You just cut. Numbers matter. Okay. All right. Sorry, Joe. Moving on.
Moving on. So during that year, I also just basically dedicated myself to figuring out what I wanted to do. So I would, and I had a lot of time. So I would go to the library and just read, and I would just take time to. So I was active and I was doing things for self-development. And then I finally just settled on this concept of I went into professional golf management because I liked helping people. I wanted to teach golf. I wanted to teach lessons. I wanted to help people, and that's something that I think had been a marker in my life of this is something that is fulfilling to me is helping others. And so at the end of the year, that's where I landed. I was like, I should go into education. So I transferred to Michigan State and majored in education, and took a long time to get done with that, and then came to Mississippi and taught, and then here I am now.
So where were you at before?
I was at Ferris State. It's in the middle of. It's one of I think 4 universities that has a professional golf management program.
All right.
Interesting. So would you say that gap year was a catalyst to your to get you ready for your teaching career?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent.
Yes.
It is kind of interesting.
So do you know the definition of catalyst?
Go ahead.
Or Joel?
Well, I mean, it's something you put in to make reactions happen.
It's
a starter.
Itself, it is. It creates a reaction, but the element itself does not change.
Oh.
So that's, I don't know.
I mean, I would say, because I can, you talk about your teacher in kindergarten having that calm presence. Mm-hmm. And Joe, I think you catalyze a lot of things, and I think you have not changed much from kindergarten on.
No, that's kind of.
No, but also talking about not changing though. And I remember too. Joe, when you came back to the university after being in the teacher corps and then working with the teacher corps to help in the summers and then coming back to interview for the job as director of the Mississippi Teacher Corps, one of the things you said in your interview is that you just like to help people. Mm-hmm. And
Yes.
so Joe does help people. A
That's
lot of
it's
things.
consistent.
Like, it's very consistent. So
Yeah,
like,
and
it doesn't
again,
change.
It's just something that's always. I think when you boil teaching down to the basics, most teachers that's at the heart of what they want to do. They want to be helpful. They want to make the world a better place. They want to help people become better people. Yeah, and so it's definitely a main driver for me.
Right, and we can see evidence of that. I mean, if you've ever gotten a Google form from Dr. Ann Monroe, she did not.
It's not really
Yeah.
true, but Joe probably did help with a lot of the
A lot of them.
forms.
Now I think she's good, but it took a while. It took a while.
But that's good. See, then it's not like I've helped her learn something. And
Right.
she can do it on her own now.
That's right.
Rather than having me to do it for her. I guess I don't know. Cut that. You're going to cut some of this, right? No, you didn't cut any of it? Oh, great.
Yeah, we cut the beginning and the end off, and then we hit publish. That's how it goes, Joe. All right, so now we're down to the mile marker. So I think that we talk about a mile marker. We talk about it as a moment of professional growth. And again, you've had a lot of different experiences around the world, and maybe you're going to get to that, of experiences that you could talk about. And so I'm really curious to think about of all the moments you've had, what's the one moment you're picking to share with us today?
Sure. So what I want to talk about is connections. And I want to talk about actually, because again, I just don't have those one moments where I have those aha, it's just not something that's happened to me. But after I finished the Mississippi Teacher Corps in 2006, I moved with my wife and my 1-year-old son to Japan to teach conversational English in Igo Ueno, Japan. And during that experience, it was interesting because my first 2 years of teaching, I taught public speaking and debate first, and then I was transferred over to English. And so the English was the state-tested subject. And that was something that's basically like, if state-tested subjects in Mississippi are part of a school's accreditation, and so it becomes a very important piece to their school rating.
For schools, yeah.
Right, and so you have to, and so there's just an incredible amount of pressure on the teachers then to produce results, and so it's very content driven. And then also I remember, so it's interesting to look back on how I was trained as a teacher versus how I view teaching now. And one of the main differences is when I first came in and took education classes, there were a lot of people saying, students and teachers, not just one person, saying, "Don't smile till Christmas." That was the phrase. I don't know if that's still, people have encountered that much.
I mean,
or
I
if you
hear
have
that.
encountered, there's actually, I looked in the library, there's a book that has that title. It says "Don't Smile Till Christmas."
Gosh.
It's a teacher prep book that was written in probably the 70s or 80s or something.
Wow.
Which is a really interesting concept when you think about it. Basically, like, at the heart of it, it's saying, like, you need to remove your humanity
It's not good.
from yourself
Yeah.
when you really start to think about it. Now the concept behind it is you have to have control of your classroom. Like you are the basically it's a top down approach. Like,
And
you
control
need
means no warmth. Like
right.
that-
No, there cannot
That's
be.
what it's being communicated by saying that. Yeah.
Exactly. And then experiencing teaching in my first year and finding that the best moments were those connections of with warmth and laughter and enjoyment. Like that's why I became a teacher. And that's also like what was fun about it. It wasn't, I knew when people were saying that, that's just not going to happen. Like, I can have classroom management. I'm going to be very prepared and I can enforce, my rules and procedures and things like that. But to not smile till Christmas, like, that just sounds like a miserable experience.
Yeah.
So then going to Japan, I had to kind of think, okay, now I'm in a situation. So let me kind of set the stage a little bit. I'm in this small town, and the school that I'm teaching at is not what you would imagine a traditional school. It's a private school.
And do you know any Japanese?
No, I go in knowing nothing.
Knowing
other
nothing.
than-
All right, sorry. Just
Other
more
than
context.
Ohio from Big Bird, and other than that, yeah,
Got it. Thank you.
That's it.
I actually didn't know that. So good.
You didn't see that Big Bird episode?
No,
where he
no,
goes to
no. I
Japan?
just didn't know, like, if you didn't know any Japanese going into this.
He didn't know if you were
situation.
fluent or not.
No,
Right.
not fluent.
Like
yeah.
and again, did you answer a flyer? Just
So, well, by then there was websites, and so there was this website that had listings of jobs in Japan, and also in
and you
Korea.
wanted to go to Japan.
Yes, I was interested
Okay.
in living there.
Cool. Okay.
To teach English, and so there's it's a fairly high need for that
Yeah,
over
yeah.
there.
Okay.
So I filled out several applications. I got an offer in Korea and then also in Japan, and I decided to go with the one in Japan. It just
Okay.
seemed like a better opportunity. So the school was they call them they're jukus, and it's an after school. So basically, most children in Japan have two schools. They have one that they go to in the morning, and then they have like a tutoring school that they go to in the afternoon. So this was the afternoon school. And then within those schools, there's various pieces. Some of them are studying for the exams that are administered in the Japanese public schools. Other people are there to learn conversational English, and then there's also like an English part of the Japanese school system. There's that test as well. So I was the conversational English teacher. So I had some students I basically had ages 3 through 75. That was the age range that I taught.
Wow.
And
Talk about differentiated instruction. Holy
yes,
cow.
exactly. And so it was, and most of the lessons were 1-to-1. Some were were 2-to-1, but most of it was just a 1-to-1 conversation, similar to what we have here. And the school itself was, if you think of like the houses in San Francisco where they're all kind of lined up close together and they're kind of tall and skinny, it was just like that. And so my classroom, it was 3 floors. My classroom was on the first floor, and it's basically the first floor was just kind of a long hallway with 3 classrooms and a front desk. And so I had one of the classrooms. They had glass walls around it, and the entire room was as big as this office, about 10 by 12, 10 feet by 12 by feet, 10 feet by 12 feet. And so that's kind of like to kind of set the scene a little bit.
Okay.
Also, you take your shoes off when you go in. So
Yeah.
you basically, there's a rack that has slippers, and you take your shoes off, put slippers on, and then you go to your classroom. So there was a curriculum, and so there's kind of they have this the company that I worked for, they have this entire book series that's from beginner to advanced, and children and adults as well. And so they kind of like give you a book and say, okay, this person's on this book, here's what page, here's what chapter they're on, and things like that. And so then your students would come in, and it was at that point also, like, you don't have a classroom management plan. Like, I'm not going to be sending these kids or adults to detention,
right.
or like there's no in-school suspension for like they're paying to be there.
Yeah.
Or their parents are paying for them to be there. And so what I found was that some of them did not care whatsoever about the curriculum. They just wanted to come in and talk. They just wanted to come in and make connections. Which was awkward because as a person who's employed by this company, if they come in and observe, which they never did, but if they come in and observe, they're going to be like, hey, you're supposed to be on page 3 of this book. And true to what you might expect, Japan is very regimented in like in organized. Like things are just it's ingrained in their bones, I guess. Is just this concept of organization. And so I had this one student who was a doctor, and he just wanted to come in and talk. And he wanted to talk about his day. He wanted to talk about food. He told me all about how all the different things that he ate, including like he ate a whale, like actually like
Wow.
whale meat. He talked about the healthcare setup in Japan, how like they have public healthcare, but he was basically like, yeah, what happens is you get 10 patients come into your office all at once, and I have a seat, and I spin on the seat, And I asked them, "What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?"
Wow.
And they just
Talk about
everybody
HIPAA violation.
right. And I was like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh!" And
Yeah.
so it sparked some good conversations. So like in the U.S., there's no way, like there's no way you cannot talk about that.
I've got a rash in a bad
Yeah.
spot.
Right. Like because you would know everyone else's business, but because he came in one day, he's like, "Yeah, I'm just tired. I saw 250 patients today."
my gosh.
Wow.
And I was like,
Holy
wait,
cow.
I was like, wait a second, like, how is that even possible? For you? It's like, and he explained
Yeah.
what I just explained.
So when you said, Joe, just for a second, when you said they want to just come and talk, so the question that comes to my mind is that they wanted to come in and talk to practice their English in a conversational style, or they wanted to come in and talk because they needed to talk to somebody, or both. Like what?
It was all of the above plus a couple others because I had little kids whose parents thought that this was important for them. So
Okay.
I'm going to talk
Yeah.
about one of my younger students too. So one other thing though that was interesting that he mentioned about the healthcare system is that if someone was sick, they wouldn't. It was like really sick, like terminally ill. They wouldn't tell them their diagnosis, but they would tell the family.
Oh, wow.
Oh my gosh.
And I remember
horrible.
thinking, like, I remember that was my response. I was like, that's like, how can you not tell them? And he explained it as, well, if someone is dying, you don't want them, and you know they're going to die, you don't want to put that burden on them. You want them to enjoy the rest of their life as much as possible. So if they don't know about the diagnosis, that's not a burden on them. That's just a burden on the family. Which again, that was his
Wow.
explanation, not necessarily. I got the point.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't think I agree with it completely,
Right.
but it was an interesting.
And he was saying that is sort of something they do in general, not just
Right.
a practice of his. This is a
Right,
general
that's
cultural practice.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had a lot of wonderful conversations, and we did nothing in the book. We absolutely just abandoned the book. And then I also, his wife was also a student. So they were learning English. To kind of get to what you were asking about, him and his wife were learning English because they like to travel. So they would, they traveled the world. And English is pretty much the most common language you can have if you're going to learn another language for traveling. English is the one to learn. And so that's what they were doing. So they were motivated in that sense. She was much more motivated to learn. He was just having fun with life. That was his thing. And so another interesting thing is a lot of my students would take my wife and I out to dinner commonly because that was kind of like an extra lesson.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it was like
both of
it
you.
was win-win because like we're getting food and getting to experience some cultural experiences with food in Japan. And I remember one night he took us out and it's called shabu shabu. Where basically like in Japan they have these restaurants where you sit down and you have your own room and then there's a kind of a grill or a stove in front of you and they bring out the food and then you cook it yourself and then eat it. Which, as you can imagine, in the U.S. there's no way because someone would undercook their own food or there's all
No,
sorts of
I've done that in Seattle.
Oh, really?
Like,
Okay.
well, it's like like a pot of broth. Like they cook the pot of broth and you could throw
and you put the
meats
beef in
it.
and you swish it back and forth
Yeah, yeah.
and then so we went to one like that. Well, he had us like he's like, well, try this, and so he would have us like eating this like raw beef. And I remember going home that night. Both of my wife and I were just like, oh, like this hurts. Like it was so good, and like we didn't get sick, but it was like this is.
Yeah.
But so, but I had to find different ways to connect with students. During those conversations, and so with him it was about food and travel, like and same with his wife. We can connect over food and travel, and for most of the students there, it was very natural. Like you just kind of start having a conversation. Some of them like to use the book because it would introduce like a grammatical concept, and then there would be kind of a structured conversation you could have, and then you can kind of switch the conversation up, and based on their skill level, you could kind of like adjust it and have fun with it, and you could basically kind of do you would basically like play out scenarios that common scenarios with conversations. But then I had this one student, so this was really interesting. He was 75 years old, my oldest student, and he so this is in 2006. So he grew up during the 1930s, and so
Okay.
as you know, like with World War II,
Yep.
Iga Ueno's about 5.5 hours from Hiroshima, and then about 10 hours from Nagasaki. So he lived. He wasn't old enough to fight in the war, but he lived through that experience firsthand. And so what he did is he realized, okay, we've just been defeated by the United States. Like, they're going to be a significant force in the future of this country. And so he basically decided English is the future for me. And so what he had a dictionary, and he basically, like, you're not supposed to read the dictionary like cover to cover, but he would just start at the beginning of the dictionary and go through and read and take notes and learn all of these words. And then there was English radio programs that he would listen to. So he's now 75, and that was like his one hobby was this.
Wow.
So he was fluent. Like, he knew English better than I did. And what he was really passionate about was like the really nuanced idioms and etymologies, the word origins and things like that. And it was what it made. The point I'm getting at is it was very hard to make connections with him because first of all, he knew more than I did. I had studied English in college, but the linguistics was not my forte. I took those classes, but it wasn't like I became an expert in those things. He was an absolute expert in those things. And he kind of had this thing where he would introduce an idiom or a word or something and say, like, well, what's the origin of that? And I'd be like, I don't
help you.
know. Like sometimes I could. He's like,
You want to talk about food, bro?
You were telling me about that beef I ate last night?
Right, exactly. Sure, you don't want to go to eat while we talk about that? Like, getting kind of hungry. But he just, and it was almost like he would ask it in like the way a lawyer asks the questions, where he already knows the answer.
Yeah.
So he's kind of sort of like trying to one up me in those situations. And I just was sitting there like, I can't. This is a one-to-one conversation.
Yeah.
Like, if I was at like a dinner party or something, I could just be like, oh yeah, that's great, and kind of move on. But like he's paying to have these lessons, so I'm kind of
Stuck in those
while he's just
conversations,
basically
yeah.
like trying to one up me constantly, I'm just sitting there like I have no idea what is going on. And then the lesson right after him was the little boy who was 3, who's Fumiya, who he was a 3-year-old. Like, and his mom, wanted him to learn English. He wanted to do anything but learn English.
Yeah.
And so the classroom had to set up a kind of like, I had like a little basketball hoop. I had like bean bags and buckets and things. So you could play, like carnival games. So with kids, you do flashcards, and if they said the word right or picked out something right, they could play the game for a minute or two or something. And so it was a lot of like game based.
Or like using the vocabulary, like I'm throwing, or
so
one
I'd be
beanbag, 2 beanbags.
Right. So I'd like show a picture of an apple, and I'd say, "What is this?" And they say, "It's an apple." And then you'd be like, "That's great. Now you get to throw," and then you give them points or whatever.
Yeah.
It's just because if you sit and it's really hard to sit with a 3-year-old and be like, "Tell me about your day." Like, we're not going to have an in-depth conversation.
And they're definitely not taking you to dinner.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you know the origin of this word?
Right. And so that was much more like, let's make this fun.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is, like, in terms of saying, if I said, hey, don't do that, they don't know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And also I wasn't allowed, it had to be a full immersion classroom. So I wasn't allowed to use Japanese words.
Oh.
Or that one
Okay.
you knew.
Right, the one Ohio. Well, and then dame is the other one. Dame means stop or don't, like, or not allowed. And so that I learned that one fast. Because so you have to use only English, and then with Fumiya, he did not connect with any of the games. It was so hard to figure out how to connect with this child who didn't know English, did not want to learn English. And I finally found something that worked. He loved the Gingerbread Man. And afterward, like several years later, I realized, like, he was like he saw himself in the gingerbread man, because the gingerbread man basically like runs away,
Run as fast as you can.
like is able to is like
Can't
free.
teach me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like that was him. Like he that's what he wanted. He wanted that freedom of like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, don't put me in this 10 by 12 with this
Right.
weird guy from Michigan.
Right. Yeah. And so, wait, what? Weird. The weird guy from Michigan. Okay.
Well,
Yeah, that's true. Because I'm not from Japan, so that's. Yeah.
I mean, you.
Weird to
I'm
the
s-
kid and
I'm
maybe
saying
some
you look
others.
differently.
It's a different podcast.
You look differently than most of the
Sure.
people he interacted with on a daily basis.
Sure, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. All right, moving on.
Wow, I apologize, Joe.
That's okay. It's all right. Yeah. And so he really connected with the gingerbread man, and he so he always he
So
would
were you reading a
find-
book?
Yeah, the gingerbread
got
man
it.
book, and so he would always find it and be like, "We got to do this. Like, I want to do this." And also his lesson was only 30 minutes. Like, but as you know, like in teaching, when things are not going well,
Man.
30 minutes.
Well, 30
is
minutes for
hours,
3-year-olds
yeah.
long anyway.
a lifetime.
Yeah.
It's- and so I finally was able to, as I was reading the book, I would have him read more and more of each page. And then, because the part that he really liked, when we get to the run part, he would actually get up and run. He would run out of the classroom and then kind of like do like a little hide and seek thing, and I have to like run and find him real fast. And then we'd come back and then read like 2 more sentences.
Yeah.
But he wanted to run and hide. Like that was he absolutely loved that. But eventually we were able to like get it to where he could read most of the book. I don't necessarily know if he understood all the words,
But he knew the
but
sound,
He knew.
yeah.
Yeah, he could say the words, and we got somewhere with him. But I remember, so he was right after Hirooki, the 75-year-old. So I remember one time I was talking with him, and also I taught from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. So he was at the 8 p.m. slot.
Yeah.
Fumiya's coming in at 9 p.m. And I'm sitting there talking with this person who's fluent in English. I've had a hard time connecting with this person, and but I have to keep an eye on the time, and so I can't look at my watch. But what I could do, since it had a glass wall, I could see the clock and the reflection, and so every now and then I just kind of glance up and see the clock, because again, like there's only 10 minutes in between the lessons to flip the room over from conversational English to a 3-year-old who wants to play games and run around. And so we're getting close to the end of the lesson. Probably, I think there was about 5 minutes left, and I just, he was talking with me, and I just glanced real quick, and he noticed that I glanced, and he's like, what are you looking at? I was like, I was just looking at the clock real quick, and just to check the time, and that really like offended him. And so he actually ended up leaving like almost immediately, and then came back, and we talked about it again, and I was just like, look, like I have to check the time, because otherwise, Fumiya's going to be here, and things have to start on time and everything. And so I just remember thinking like, wow, like I've really some students that you have an instant connection with them. Like they come in and they have an REO Speedwagon shirt on, and you're like, hey, this is going to be great.
Rock and roll, brother.
Just like my band Catalyst.
Right, exactly. And so and then some students it takes a minute, but you typically find a common interest. And then other students, it just takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
And sometimes you find some connections, and just with some students, it's just they have to be ready for the connection, and the teachers have to be ready for the
Well,
connection.
it might
too.
even be looking for a reason not to. I mean, it almost sounds like he was like looking for ways to either discount you or to be offended. So.
Right. I think, I'm not sure. Sure. I just know. I also know like he just had a very hard life. With the conversations I had with him, and he was a very unique individual. In that, like, he's in this town of 100,000 people in the middle of Japan, and he speaks perfect English. And there's no one probably in that town, if not in the country, that is similar to, and has that skill. So it was I guess the factor that ties this all together is those connections that you make with your students, the connections that you make with them, with the content, and just realizing that over time, like that's really the common thread. Like and as I kind of started to mention, like you have to be ready for that as a teacher, because sometimes I'll admit I have not been ready for that connection. Mm-hmm. Like there's either whether it's personal things that are going on, or just not having the experience, or not having the right mindset for it, to be able to have those connections. And then the students have to have that as well. And so there's a lot of common phrases in education, but one is when the student is ready, the master will appear, and that your students have to be ready for that as well. And they don't always want to connect necessarily directly with the content. Sometimes they just want to make that human connection with the people around them and with their teachers specifically. Yeah.
Excellent. I mean, I just heard that in the went to one of our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning workshops and heard the guest speaker. I can't remember that speaker's name, but she talked about just the value of relationships.
Relationships is what she was talking about.
Yeah, and the need for them in order, just for survival. Just why we need relationships. Mm-hmm. But then also how those relationships help foster learning. Right?
Yes.
You need those connections.
Well, the act of teaching is a relational. It's a relational interaction, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what it is.
Right.
And if you don't have a relationship, the interaction's not very good.
Yeah.
Right. You have. Yeah. It's a foundational piece.
Right.
It's
yeah.
Absolutely. And also one thing about Fumiya. So there was a festival in the town where I lived, the Ueno Tenjin Festival, and basically they have these I guess you'd call it a parade float, but these parade floats they're 800, 900 years old, and they're made completely of wood, and they're like 2-story tall, and the wheels are wooden, everything's just 100% wood, and so my supervisor. They basically have people tow them. They don't have cars tow them. They have people tow them. So I got to do that once, and I remember you always have those students who in the classroom are a certain way, and then outside of the classroom they're completely different. And so I remember I was pulling the standury, and I saw Fumiya, and he's like, "Hey," and he's like, "Oh, sensei," and like, which is actually like the greatest thing ever is to have your students call you sensei. Like it's such a wonderful feeling. And
when you came back to the States and started back at high school, did you make your American high school
no,
students
I didn't.
call you that?
I should have, but I didn't.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. But yeah, I just remember him being like, "Oh, that's basically like." You could see like he was excited to see me, whereas like in the classroom he's just like, "Oh, like just get to the gingerbread man," like just like.
When you came back, did you start Cobra Kai right away, or did you?
I should have.
And you kind of talked about this a little bit, Joe, but why was this important to you, your growth as a teacher? Because you've done a lot of teaching since that experience in Japan.
Right. I think what it does, it helps you have a longer, more a long-term view of teaching, and realizing that within a moment, you may not make, the connections that you're making right now aren't just for that moment. And so I see that more as you spend more time in education, things sort of circle back to you. And so whether that's writing a letter of recommendation, or like we were in a summer school in Holly Springs, and we have other programs come in, and they're observing teaching, and they're basically teacher prep programs. And a couple summers ago, one of my students from when I taught in Cleveland, when I was in Mississippi Teacher Corps, was part of that program. And so you kind of get to experience that sort of, I guess I don't know if it's a boomerang or that sort of karma coming back to visit.
Yeah.
And seeing that. And so that's the longer you stay in it, the more you get that.
Yeah.
And the more you realize that, well, those connections are what make this make this important and make this fulfilling.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing that's interesting, you just said, and I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong, but this idea about building a relationship is longitudinal, meaning it takes time,
Yes.
and it should be over a period of time. And then just from thinking back about what you said about two of your favorite teachers were teachers that you looped with. Looping as in meaning that
Yeah.
you stay in multiple grades with, like you had that first grade teacher, first and second grade, I believe you said, or kindergarten.
Yeah, kindergarten first, yeah.
Kindergarten first grade, and then you had the other teacher, fifth and
sixth,
sixth.
yep.
And so thinking about, just kind of connected with me, this idea about having this long-term relationship with somebody and how beneficial that can be when you see it as something that is ongoing. And then that's why I think, there's, has been interest in looping in schools. And when I taught elementary school, I did not do any looping, but we did do some looping in some of our kindergarten and first grade classrooms. And, there's benefit to that, to having those students for a long period of time. There's an investment. Yeah, there's the motivation to make the investment by the teacher, and I think also the student, depending on the age, but also that, understanding over time and building that relationship over time and what that means. So, interesting.
Well, just think like it was you think about the connections that you're building within a classroom, right? But then, if you do a good job of building a classroom environment, it's not only within your classroom, but it's across all the classrooms that you had. And so thinking about like, oh, you had Dr. Sweeney, I've had Dr. It's like, so we've had a chance to interact with several people that have had Dr. Sweeney for as a professor, or you as a professor, and then it's like there's a common there's a common like a language about it, and so like there's connections beyond that you maybe don't see, but like people are like, oh wow, like we all had this same experience. So
And one interesting thing I learned about in Japan, so that, the phrase "a rolling stone gathers no moss." So I'm curious, what does that mean to either of you?
what does it mean to me?
Yes.
I just keep thinking.
It's not a trick
Mick
question.
Jagger.
Right.
I was thinking that rather than moss, like
It's Dylan, right? Anyway, go ahead. It's a
I think the
song.
Rolling Stones.
I know that you're
Yeah,
taking
yeah.
of the band. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the song.
Like a Rolling Stone.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just think of it as like if you keep moving forward, you don't collect things, right? Like you rather than staying still and like things grow and pile around that thing.
Right. So you see it as a positive to keep rolling, right?
Yeah, keep moving.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I guess you could see it that way, but also if you're constantly moving and not settling or whatever, then, like the song, like a complete unknown, just like real life. If you're an unknown, who do you have a relationship with? If you're unknown,
Once upon a time.
then, well, it depends on how you think about moss, I guess.
right. And so
I like
when
moss myself.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because when I went to Japan, I thought the same thing. It's like you have to keep moving and you keep fresh and that's a positive thing. And then what that means in actually like because Japan kind of has a similar phrase too, and the concept is that you kind of like develop roots and there's time for things to establish and set in. Similar to what we were talking about with relationships. If you stay in a community or like coming back to my kindergarten teacher, Miss Nowak, she was there. She was there. Maybe 40 years. She may still be there. I'm not sure. She taught my niece also, and she was I was in kindergarten, but I saw her as an older
Yeah, and Joe, I was just talking with you about this the other day, but I had recently had the chance to see my first grade teacher last week, and she's 90 years old, and happened to be with my childhood best friend at the time when we saw her, and we both, were it's like a celebrity, and just how we thought thought she was old.
Right,
right. But we actually did
She was probably
we
in
did the
her
math.
30s or-
Actually, she was in her 40s.
Okay.
Because she's 90 now. But like to us, it was it was just so crazy to see her like that, and there she was back in the same space where I had seen her on a day-to-day basis at my old elementary school, and that was nuts. It was crazy. But she taught me. She taught my older siblings. She taught my younger siblings. And she taught many, 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 many children after that. So
She gathered a lot of moss.
she did. Yeah.
So I need moss. I like that.
Yeah, and nothing against what you're thinking, because it's also good to like learn, and in some ways you can take that, you can take that and shape that into your own.
Well, it
thing.
kind of reminds me of how some people like they keep changing curriculum over and over again versus like you're not allowing any moss to like, hey, let's establish some roots, some routines, like actually get better at teaching this curriculum rather than like, oh, we tried it for 2 years and it doesn't work. Like you don't even know. Like versus if it's a good curriculum, let it go. All right, that's pet peeve. All right, pocket-sized philosophy statement. You got one? Like a
just
philosophy
basically,
statement you kind of carry with you?
It would just basically be the question: what are the connections? What connection are you making with students? What connections are you making with the content? That's basically where are the connections, and how can you facilitate that? And that's where the learning occurs, and that's how you're able to help students.
All right. Anne.
Yep.
When we think about connections,
Yes.
and also Joe, because you're a teacher educator, have you thought about like resources or things that might might connect to somebody?
Yeah, I've got a couple, and this is completely related. Although at first it won't sound like it is, but so this is a few years ago. I sort of did a deep dive into. I was asked to do a presentation on like repairing relationships in the classroom, and so I started reading Marshall Rosenberg's about nonviolent communication. His book it's not for teachers particularly, but it's Nonviolent Communication: A Language of Life. But I started and teachers have used it, and even at the time that I was kind of looking into Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication, he had worked with different countries and repairing relationships amongst communities and things like that. But teachers, it's certainly applicable in the classroom, and there had even been had even done lectures for teachers and had created a smaller like booklet for teaching that I really relied on a lot. But the idea is that, and it sounds like nonviolent communication, like something like that has to do with violence, but he's talking about, and some of it does, but he's also talking about how do you build a healthy relationship, and how do you speak with other people in a way that is conducive to building a relationship and not tearing down things. And so his whole idea is, and I wrote it down because I knew what Joe was. This is one of those ones I wasn't caught off guard. Joel's always like, we have no idea what people are going to come and talk about, and Joel's like spewing off 50 resources, and I'm like, but this one I knew what you were talking about. So, but he talks about observing, like especially, and this is for anyone, but if you think about it in the terms of teachers, like observation versus evaluation, and thinking about when we work with kids, we should be, as teachers, we're observers. It's our greatest tool, right? Assessment tool. So instead of always evaluating what kids are doing and putting some kind of judgment on it, just observe. What is it? And then through that observation, what are the emotions you're feeling? What are the emotions they're feeling? And what are the needs that they have? And so thinking about things differently instead of putting a judgment on something, when you hear or when you watch or when you observe children, it's just about looking. What is it? What are they feeling? What are they needing? And then requesting, making a request of the student if there's a need for a change in behavior instead of a demand. And we've talked about this, Joel, even on this podcast a lot, about control over versus helping someone control themselves, and the unfortunate situation where adults in society in general, but particularly in schools, feel like they must control kids. It's exactly what you were talking about at the beginning of the podcast, Joe, about having that top down approach. It's not healthy. And it's not good for relationships. It's very difficult to build a relationship with someone when you feel like they're judging you, evaluating you constantly, have their hand on your head at all times, and that type of thing. So that's sort of what Rosenberg's work's about, is observing, thinking about feelings from both ends, the needs that need to be met, and then thinking about what can be requested of yourself and others instead of demands. There is a book, and I have this book, and I was searching for it in my bookshelf, and I just couldn't find it, but it's called The Compassionate Classroom, Relationship-Based Teaching and Learning, that is specifically they took nonviolent communication, Rosenberg's nonviolent communication, and put it into the context of the classroom. And it's by Hart and Hodson, and it's a really great book about building relationships in the classroom and the importance of having a emotionally safe space, and that's what's conducive to learning, not this top down, don't smile till the holidays, structured. You can have all of the structure that you need by doing a lot of things, and smiling is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get the classroom that you want if you don't approach it from the minute that school starts the way that you want it. Mm-hmm. You don't need to start a different way to get the result that you need. You need to start the way that you want it to look in the first place. And so those are the resource drops. It's thinking about, having people look up nonviolent communication from Rosenberg, and in just a general sense, but also anything that's out there that's connected to education with nonviolent communication, and specifically the compassionate classroom that is taking Rosenberg's work and putting it in the context of teaching and learning in a K-12 environment.
Yeah, so thinking about almost the humanizing the classroom. So like you think about each of those three examples you gave, like technically you were supposed to take that book and teach whatever the next, for the 3-year-old to the 75-year-old. It's mm-hmm. like, versus every single one you did something a little bit different. And mm-hmm. so having teachers recognize their agency, I think, is just one tool. It's a tool I don't think teachers recognize that they do have. Like maybe their number one tool is the door of their classroom, mm-hmm. And so that's one thing. But then two, I was looking over at my bookshelf, and one of the first books I ever received when I started teaching was Teaching with Love and Logic. And so it was like, kind of like what you were talking about, Ann, like removing, thinking about developing relationships, developing those connections with students. And then like, once you have those connections, then like at that time it was about classroom management, like you've built up this account with them, so if they are late for class and you just give them a look, they're like, oh yeah, because you have the connection, versus no, now I'm docking half of a point off of this, and that'll teach you, mm-hmm. Versus when is it really, if I don't care about that point and I don't care about you, then what does it matter? And then also too, just I think sometimes there might be folks that they don't know how to build connections. They need some help, and so there's a lot less either it's how to have students creating connections within groups. So if it's about designing group work with Elizabeth Cohen, I think the latest edition has edited by Rachel Lotan. Just about kind of the dynamics rather than just putting people together. How do you actually foster really good connections? Any of the Kagan structures that they do collaborative or cooperative group work. Actually just got a book, Cultivating Mathematical Hearts, Culturally Responsive Mathematics Teaching in Elementary Classrooms. And I think there's some good stuff in there with regards to we're doing more than just, again, teaching the book, right? We're doing mm-hmm. more than that. And so it's just one example of mm-hmm. those sorts of texts. So.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. There's a lot of simple ways you can make connections with students, and really, it's just about asking them questions. Simple. Finding the time to ask them, "How's your day been?" Just very simple things, and it for some students it takes a long time to build trust with some students. They just it's just the matter whether it's trust issues or it's just how some students are. But over time, they'll realize, okay, this person is invested in me, and they start to open up. So, again, just asking questions. And then to kind of go along with what the resources you were talking about, one thing that we do at our summer school is we use restorative practices. And there's plenty of books on that. But basically, the concept is when something happens and a relationship has been harmed, you address it, and you talk with the student about it. You talk about the relationship that was harmed. You talk about any sort of restitution, and then it could include an apology and things like that. You basically understand what was your role in this situation for the student, and how do they harm that, and then how do we fix that?
Yeah, that reconcile.
Exactly. And so there's that is since we've been doing that, the number of students, this last summer we didn't dismiss any students from our summer
Wow.
program, which, as you know, and from
Yes.
earlier years, there's a lot, unfortunately,
Yeah.
because it was a very much a control.
Yes.
Unfortunately, a control-based
Yeah.
school, and so
Right.
being able to because you need to obviously keep your students around and
Right.
and also teach them those life skills. It's important to be able to repair relationships.
Yeah.
That's an important life skill.
Absolutely.
And so that has been very effective.
Joe, I need to get you information about this nonviolent communication
Mm-hmm.
because I think you guys might, that really goes hand in hand with what you're talking about that you're doing
Yeah.
up at Holly Springs High. So that's great.
Well, and that was the other book. When you talk about just asking questions, talking about your day, Matthew K., he wrote the book Not Light But Fire, which talks about like having like difficult conversations in the classroom, like whether about race or whatever. Like he says, like, well, first let's talk about, hey, how's your day going? You know, it's got to start
Yeah.
somewhere. So building those things. All right. Joe, you want if people want to learn more about Mississippi Teacher Corps or our MAT program?
Yes, if someone's interested in teaching, they can basically, if you just search for Mississippi Teacher Corps, it'll be the first thing that pops up. And go to the website for more information. Same with if you type in online MAT at University of Mississippi, you'll be able to find the information about the online program. And it's basically they're alternate route programs. So someone who's non-education has a bachelor's degree in a non-education major and wants to get into the classroom and teach, this is a path for them to do that.
Yeah, looking to make those connections. Hey,
Yes.
and we could use you. Yeah. So, all right. Thank you, Joe, for sharing your mile marker on the road to better teaching.
And thanks to all of you out there for tuning in to The Road to Better Teaching. This episode may be over, but The Road to Better Teaching never ends. Please subscribe to the podcast so you're notified when the next episode is ready for a listen. And if you like what you hear, please rate and review the podcast.
And you can also share the podcast with someone you feel may be interested in these stories of educator development, or if you want to share with them opportunities to become a teacher that Joe talked about there. And if you want to find any links to the resources mentioned, you can check out the show notes for this episode at theroadtobetterteaching.com or wherever you found this podcast. Finally, thank you to all of you listeners out there for taking the road to better teaching. This world is a better place because you have used the gifts you've been given to teach others. And this has been an Amadon Planet production. Good.
I know how to hold a mic.
Oh, he's the lead singer of the band.
Wait, what was the band name?
Catalyst. Yes.
Okay, 100 points for anybody that can put Catalyst into the podcast, but nobody else knows.
Oh, yes. This is what we're looking for.